Hi everyone, Mr. Silbaugh here, and welcome to the video for day 1 of Module 1. Module 1 is for Markup Language and Site Development Essentials. Alright, so why do we study web design? Web design has increased over the past few years. I'm sure if you go online at any point, you go to a website, okay? But you may have noticed that over the years, that the websites have gotten better. They've become more advanced, more features. I really wish, and I probably will at some point, show you some of the web designs from way back in the day and how far we've come. Some jobs out there now require people to have some web design experience, and we're getting to the point now where people can be asked to design a website even if they have zero experience in doing so. All right, so let's talk about some of the current skills used in web design. One of the first things we could do is inform coworkers about any team projects, like working together. You can also use it to contribute or use it in general for the company intranet. An intranet is used only internally with employees of a company or organization. You could work with customers online if you set up a shop online. You can also post or get resumes if you're looking for a job or trying to find someone for a job. You can collect information from customers about their interests using like a survey, and you can collect information from social networking to get more information about them. This, of course, is not a complete list. There's plenty more uses, and you'll find out some of them as we move along throughout this year. So other reasons for web design, you may want to work as a developer or a designer. You may have an interest or passion for writing code. HTML code is different than your other types of code, so keep that in mind. These people have responsibilities for an entire company or organization. Usually they're designing for the entire company and updating it as needed. Our class is going to help you become successful in becoming a web designer. It's essentially the very basic level of web design. You're going to learn the basics of it so that you can eventually launch your own website. Keep in mind that there are advanced features which can be covered later in courses, especially in high school, if you have that interest and want to go that way. We'll use text editors or graphical editors throughout this, and we'll talk about them, and each is different, but they're rather similar. So let's talk about the basics. Back in the day, when the internet was first being built and designed, web pages were made for these giant, bulky computer screens. You notice we don't really have those anymore. We have thinner, sleeker computers, we have laptops, but more importantly, we have phones now, and the size of the screen has shrunk, and we'll talk about that. Web pages are no longer viewed through web browsers such as Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari, the major web browsers that we use to access the internet. However, people can view web pages through smartphones, tablets, smart TVs, gaming consoles, different apps. They're accessing the internet in different ways than ever before. These devices are all capable of reading what's called markup languages, and HTML, the essential code for web design, is a markup language. There's a huge push now for responsive design in web design, and we'll talk about that. But web design has come a very long way and continues to evolve. Key terms that I talked about, especially in the past slide: markup language. This is a series of commands used to format, organize, and describe information on a web page. And responsive design. This is an approach to web development that uses a series of techniques to make web pages dynamic and accessible on all device sizes. So let's talk about HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language. In order to build a website, we start with HTML. This is the standard markup language on the web. It's one of the most commonly used, especially in web design. It was standardized, meaning that there's a series of checks to make sure that, this is set a certain way, like, how we have standards for education where you're supposed to do certain competencies. The same thing goes for HTML. It has a series of set things that it should be able to do and how it should function and run. This is set by the World Wide Web Consortium, or as we call it, the W3C. You can find out more information by going to their website at www.w3.org. HTML defines page structure, hyperlinks, graphics, and more. Essentially, HTML is used to send out the basic layout of your stuff. It's more about the content, okay? HTML can be manually entered into a text editor, a graphical user interface, which is called GUI, or like GUI enters auto text. We'll talk about it, or you can use both. The important thing about HTML, though, I will say, is HTML is structure and content. Okay, it is not about making it look pretty and fancy. Hypertext markup language, HTML, this is the traditional authoring language used to develop web pages for many applications. All right, on the reverse side, we have CSS, which is cascading style sheets. These are the rules for styles. This is what makes your web design look nice and pretty and colorful. Typically, these rules are in an external file, and the way that that works is you have your document, which is your HTML file. This is all of your content and how you've laid it out. And then you have a separate file that's your CSS file. This file lays out all of the style, the color, all of that fun, fancy stuff. They are separate, but they are linked together, and we'll talk about that in, I believe, Unit 3 is when we discuss that and how we link those together. This essentially determines how the elements are displayed on a screen. It can define font, color, phrase elements, lots more, okay? It's currently in version 3, and version 3 has been around for a while now. And one of the nice things about CSS that if all of your HTML pages, because think of a website with multiple pages, those multiple pages are multiple HTML documents, okay? You usually only have one CSS file. But if you have like 5 HTML documents, if you make one change on your CSS file, it pushes them out to all of them if it's linked properly. So let's say that you want to make the text bigger, like you have a headline at the top of your page and you want to make it big on all of them. CSS is nice because it will make the same font size on all of your pages with only changing one page, and that's your CSS page. This does allow for time and consistency. CSS is really, really nice because you don't have to edit each individual page. Rather, you can link them all to that CSS page and make your life much easier. Key term here, cascading style sheet or CSS. This is a technology that allows greater style definition and formatting control of HTML elements. Formatting can be placed within the HTML or called remotely from an external style sheet. CSS is its own unit, and that's in Unit 3. Some additional notes, web pages are much more than HTML and CSS. Other languages that can be used, JavaScript, React, it's called SAS, syntactically awesome style sheets, goodness. We'll touch on some of these throughout the year, but we're not really going to dive into them. We'll talk about them and what they do, but that's really the furthest we'll go. All right, let's shift gears now and talk about mobile issues in web design. Web development has been severely impacted by new technologies. You know, we had giant screens that used to show our web pages, and now we're using much smaller devices in order to view them. Limited screen sizes cause web designers to modify their sites, and web designers can also make mobile sites now. We'll talk about how to make it. We won't really dive into making one because it's a little bit more complicated, but if you are interested in that, that would be covered in future more advanced HTML courses. So another issue that's currently impacting web design is cloud computing. In the cloud, where we store stuff, services and software are provided from afar. Okay, you can essentially use them without having to have them locally installed on your desktop. The data is accessed remotely from another location. Cloud services can include social networks and blogs. Okay, these sites do not require HTML, and it's just point and click. It's essentially an interface, and we'll talk more about these as we go later on in the course. Cloud computing is the key term. Software, infrastructure, and platform services that are hosted by a remote data center and provided to organizations or individuals over the internet. Cloud computing essentially is that you are connected over the internet and you are downloading things and accessing things remotely without having them locally installed. All right, let's start talking about actual writing of HTML code. First thing we're going to talk about is text editors versus GUI editors. A text editor is used to write basic HTML. You don't need a special program to use it. I like GUI editors better because of the fact it saves time. But when you're first starting out, which most of you all are, we're going to use a very basic text editor, and we call that Notepad on a computer. Text editors are programs that allow you to type text and edit it. If you use a text editor, you must save it as plain text. Don't save it as a notebook file. If you save it as a word processor, it can stop the file from creating the HTML, okay? The reason why is you want to name it with the .html or .htm extension, okay? So when you're done writing your code for this web page you're going to make, you want to make sure you save it .html. Okay, if you write it in Notepad, it'll let you do it. That allows it to open in a web browser. If you don't, it's going to assume that you saved it as a Notepad file and will only open in Notepad. Many operating systems and browsers have what's called multi-purpose internet mail extensions called MIME to process these files. I'm going to define it on the next slide. We're going to use Notepad to start in here. If you don't have access, as I was saying, I moved ahead. If you don't have access to Notepad, you can also use a text editor online. More so when we're starting, I'm going to be looking for, can you actually write out the code? All right, let's talk about the key term MIME, multi-purpose internet mail extension. This is a protocol that enables operating systems to map file name extensions to corresponding applications. It's also used by applications to automatically process files downloaded from the internet. Sounds complicated, right? Quite simple. Whenever you save a document, let's say you open up Microsoft Word and you save it, you usually save your file without thinking about it as a .docx. That .docx is your MIME. That says, hey, I'm a Word document. When you open me, you should open me in Word. And the computer recognizes that and sees that. It's very important in web design whenever you are creating your files. If it's an HTML file, you're going to save it as .html. And if it's a CSS file, you'll save it as .css. This is the way that the computer that is processing these pages knows exactly what is being processed, okay? You must be careful of your MIME and what you save it as. All right, graphical user interfaces. These are my favorite, okay? This is the opposite of typing markup language. The GUI does it for you, okay? It's very helpful because of the fact that you can essentially start typing and it fills in the blanks for you. However, you must be very careful and cautious because not all GUIs are 100% accurate, okay? Sometimes code changes, like the standards by the W3C, it changes. You want to be careful because if your GUI is not up to date, you could be coding for something that is totally out of date. GUIs are much easier to code since you don't actually write the code. You essentially start typing and it can start filling in the blanks for you and it completes it. You can point and click, you can type short phrases, and drop-down menus are all possible here. Makes your life so much easier. Commands are displayed on one side while the final result is displayed on the other. So you're typing on one side, usually the left, and then on the right, it's like in real time what it would look like, okay? Some developers like it because it saves time. Others question the validity and actual accuracy of it. All right, some of the most popular GUI editors, Adobe Dreamweaver, that's number one. I did put in a request to get it, so hopefully we'll get it by mid-year and we'll actually be able to use it and talk about it. You also have Expression Web, Mozilla SeaMonkey, Google Web Designer, and Trinket, which is what we'll be using. If we end up getting Dreamweaver, then we'll start talking about Dreamweaver and how to use that. Almost everyone should have access to Dreamweaver at some point, and if not, we'll make sure that you get it. Key term here is graphical user interface, GUI. This is a program that provides visual navigation with menus and screen icons and performs automated functions when users click command buttons. So the difference between a text editor and GUI, text editor, you're literally typing everything out. You can copy and paste, but you're basically typing your own original code. Graphical user interfaces, what it allows you to do is kind of start typing and it starts filling in the blanks for you. You'll see as we go along throughout this course the difference between the two and how you can use both. So why do we learn markup languages? GUIs are not always up to date with the latest code, as I said before. However, most times you can modify the code that may not be right. If you know HTML, you can add in code where needed, and you can use your GUI editor. It's not limited to just you typing, like you can add your own stuff into it if you need to. The GUI editor is nice because it does most of the work for you. However, if you need to add some parts in, you can code your own part, and most GUI editors will allow you to do so rather easily. And if you want to learn any scripting or programming, you'll need to write code manually. So if you do have an interest in being a programmer someday, HTML is not like programming. It's much different, but they're similar in some instances. And in programming, you're usually writing your own code. So with that in mind, this gives you good practice to start if you want to go that direction. It's also good practice to write the code yourself at first, which is what we'll be doing. Fun times will be had by all, and then you can update your page later to the latest standards. That's one of the reasons why we learn markup languages. All right, in close for this lesson, HTML is the foundation for web design. CSS supports HTML by adding more design to it. Cloud computing and mobile design devices have impacted web design, and text editors and GUIs have many pros and cons. All right, that's going to do it for this lesson.